I'm glad to be here with everybody, glad to be here and celebrating this time of dedication, this feast of dedication, the Feast of Lights. I want to share with you, as I look at this Hanukkah, I want to share with you my first Hanukkah Miracle. And for me personally, years ago, we, like many people probably in this room, struggled with whether we keep Hanukkah or not, whether we should do it. Is it something that's added on? Is it something that is not required? My wife and I came to a decision that we were going to do it one year. And I'm pretty peculiar. She says I'm one of the quirkiest people she knows. I tell her that just makes life interesting. But so when I see something, when I get fixated on something, I want it just that way. I had looked online, and there's an artist out of Israel. I now have a lot of his stuff. His name's Emmanuel, very popular. You may have come across his stuff. And he had a Hanukkah that I just fell in love with. It was beautiful, vibrant, colorful. That's what I want. Nothing else would suffice. Well, it was sold out online that year because I waited too late to buy it, right? So I said, hey, no problem. I had a work trip down to New Orleans, Louisiana. And we're in a hotel. I'm there for the week of Hanukkah. We got little tea lights or something. I can't remember exactly what we did. I was not going to have any old insufficient Hanukkah if I couldn't have the one I wanted. So day 2, I think it was, of Hanukkah that year, we're walking through the French Quarter. And I've been there many times. I took Matthew and Jenny there earlier this year. It's one of my favorite places to be. Not the crazy stuff, but the good stuff. There's a lot of culture. There's a huge Jewish culture there. And we're walking through the French Quarter. I've been there many times. I've never noticed this quaint little shop, and it's not even there anymore. It was a Judaica shop right in the French Quarter, right in the heart of the French Quarter. And I said, you got to be kidding me. So my wife and I, we walk in the store. And when I say quaint, it's very small. You walk in the front door, and the first shelf is, you almost trip over it. And I walk in, and on this first shelf right there is that Emmanuel Hanukkah sitting on the shelf, just glaring at me eye level. And I about fell out of the door. And I grabbed it up. I mean, there's nobody in the shop. I can't even find the owner. I grab it up as if I'm going to, miss my opportunity from the line of people in New Orleans waiting to buy Hanukkahs. And I take it to the desk. This woman who was the owner, she's a very kind lady. She says, oh, you're going to buy that one? I said, yes, ma'am, absolutely. I said, I tried to find it online, and I couldn't find it, and here it is in New Orleans. And she said, well, that's a shame. I said, why is that? She said, well, that thing just got here this morning. I thought I'd get to look at it for a while, but here you are buying the Hanukkah. So that's my Hanukkah miracle I love to tell. The first night here, we got here on the 25th, and there was me, Matthew, and a few other people got here early, and we were having a discussion downstairs late that night. And I said, with this celebration this week, we do it to the Bible as well, right? We read over chapters, and we read over verses. We read over whole books, and we don't really give them much attention, right? We focus on the Gospels and the Torah. That's very important, don't get me wrong. But God gave us 66 books in this thing we call the Bible, and some of them get no attention, right? Later on, I'll talk about the book of Lamentations, something that I think gets some of the least attention out of all the books, mainly because we don't want to read it. It's not a fun read. But with this holiday, I found that most people have never even read the story of the Maccabees. We celebrate it. We talk about the Festival of Lights. We link it into Yeshua, which is great, and I think we should. But we don't read the story from front to back. We don't know all the details of this story of sadness and joy and victory, and because there's more to it than some lights, some candles, some oil. There's more to it than latkes and sufganiyot, even though those are very good. There's more to it than that. When we read the story and we read the words on the pages, all of them, we see this history that's ingrained in our culture of our nation, the nation of Israel, the people of God. Matthew did a sermon series on the sympathy for the wicked. I didn't get to watch all of them. I watched some. But I don't know if he covered sympathy for the wicked for the Pharisees of the first century, because if he didn't, he could do one. Because as we look at the history of Israel and we see this culture of them coming out of bondage and forever having to fight an uphill battle against the world that continues even today. They fought a battle against Egypt to get out. God fought that battle for them, right? But they fought a battle all through the wilderness. They fight battles in the land of Israel. They're going to fight against the Philistines, this thorn in their side, the people that they call the uncircumcision, for almost the time they enter the land until we get to this time of the Maccabees. The Philistines finally die out about 300 years before Yeshua. They have to fight them. They have to fight the Babylonians. They have to fight the Assyrians. They have to come up against all these people that are referred to as Gentiles, people of the nations, those not in covenant with God. And we can have a little bit of sympathy for the first century believers who had an aversion against outsiders. In the story of the Maccabees, the rededication of the temple is their triumph, their restoration of their honor that was stolen from them. This whole story is about the rededication of that altar and that temple. The author of the Maccabees is first a historian, and I think this is why, for most of history, this has not been considered a part of divine scripture, right? He's a historian first, whereas the rest of the Bible, the authors are theologians first. The message that they're portraying in the rest of the Bible isn't necessarily meant to be exactly historically accurate. However, it's supposed to be theologically accurate. Here, the author of the Maccabees takes a historical stance first, and I think we forget that there is a theological stance that lies underneath, because he did have a theological purpose to his books. Yesterday, we were talking about the creation story, and we were talking about how God wants us to feel. He wants us to have emotions. He wants us to have joy and sadness and gladness and fear, and he wants us to know those things, and he relates his word to us in a way that we can relate to those emotions, right? He gives us experiences. He speaks to us in metaphors. I love metaphors in the Bible. He speaks to us in metaphors to tug on those emotional ties that we have connected to those examples. My favorite one to talk about is the marriage motif of God to Israel. I'll tell you, I don't believe that there's no literal ceremony. God's giving us a picture of marriage to his people so that we can relate. We married couples here, we know what it means to come into unity with each other, with our spouse. Even children understand, hopefully, that they see a good example from their parents of what marriage means. We also understand what the emotions would be attached if one of our spouses went astray and went off to another person. So when God relates idolatry to adultery, he is purposefully trying to get us into those emotions that we experience in life. Some people here have experienced that. If God didn't want us to be emotionally tied to his word, the creation story could be simply two words: God created. And that would be sufficient, right? That would be enough truth for us to understand that he is the creator of the universe, but he didn't do that. He gave us this beautiful literature that speaks to our emotions and our intellect and our soul, that calls to mind these emotions so that we will forever remember his word over and over and over. The book of Maccabees, as a historian first, can almost seem, if we don't slow down, void of emotion, because he's telling a historical story. He's giving historical facts. He's giving timelines, something that the Bible doesn't always do. But there are emotions. There are these things. When it comes to Israel alone, the book of Maccabees speaks of mourning. It speaks of life. It speaks of anger, disgrace, gladness. It speaks of Israel as those who love God. And when it comes to the enemies of Israel, it doesn't speak those things. There's no emotional ties to the enemies of Israel in the book of Maccabees. It speaks of them as those who hate us, the one emotion that's given to them. I think it's very important that they do that. When we think about traumatic experiences, because that's what's going on in Maccabees, right? They've had this extremely traumatic experience where people have come in, destroyed their city, destroyed their place of worship. They've killed their loved ones. They've done the most atrocious things imaginable to the people around them. What are traumatic events? We see that in history and we think that's trauma. That's something that would truly affect someone negatively for the rest of their life. I think for me, in my past, I've looked at other people's experiences and I've compared them to the Bible at times, and I've said, that person is struggling so bad over something that's so minuscule. Why don't you read the book of Maccabees and see what they had to go through? Why don't you read Jeremiah and see what the people of Israel had to go through when the Babylonians came in? The first 20 chapters of Jeremiah, that's some pretty crazy language. Why don't you compare your measly little experience to that? That's the wrong answer, right? Because in the midst of our struggles, those struggles are just as strong, right? We have trauma. Here's some examples. These are kind of, I think, in order. I found them on a study. These are kind of in order of what is considered the most traumatic or what affects people the most. Death of a loved one. This can be, family, friends, even a pet, right? And sometimes we can mock people over their distress over a loss of a pet, but it's very real. Divorce, pain, injury. This can be a car accident. This can be the loss of a limb. These things affect people very traumatically. It could be a very small injury, but it could be something that was done to, a small injury that was done in such a dramatic way that it causes this trauma. Serious illness, war, natural disasters, terrorism, moving to a new location, all these things right here. Domestic abuse, a prison stay, these things affect us to our core, whether we acknowledge them or not. And if we see our own experiences and we relate to the Bible and their experiences, we can be encouraged and helped through this trauma. A lot of my master's work was done on Jeremiah. The focus of my master's was Jeremiah, the book of Jeremiah. The first 20 chapters, this poetry that goes up and down, this traumatic events that go down and then come back up to a hope of a new family and a hope of new joy, and then back down into these traumatic events, up and down. This was given to Israel as a means, in my opinion, of therapy, of overcoming their trauma. We have trauma in the book of Maccabees, right? And within the book of Maccabees, if we slow down for a minute, we'll see that there are portions of poetry built within these texts of history. There's 5 laments. Here's the verses, and we're going to go through them this morning. There's 5 laments within the first book of Maccabees. And these 5 are in the first half, right? These are in the first part of the story here, but they're part of the story, right? The first one and the 5th one, I would suggest, was inherently part of the story of the Maccabees and what they were going through. The middle 3 are what the author, who's writing this story later on, he adds his own poetry. He adds his own lament to the text. Someone who may or may not have gone through the struggles that they went through in 187, because this was written almost 100 years later, he has become emotionally connected to the story in a way that he adds his own laments to the text, and I think that's very important. These laments flow. They start out with Israel. The first lament's going to address Israel as a people and individuals. The next 3 laments are going to talk about Jerusalem's destruction and the sanctuary, the temple, which is the focus of all the laments, really. And the 5th lament is then going to go to the heavenly sanctuary. You see this flow going from people to God. And I just want to go through them this morning. I think they deserve our attention. I think they deserve our looking at to see what were the emotions of the people that were experiencing this, because we always focus on the end result, the joy, and that's good, God's triumph. But we need to feel the pain of the people who came before us. As Johnny said, we owe them a debt of gratitude for having given us the strength in our history to provide in Israel in the first century. So the first one here is 1 Maccabees 1, 24 through 28. Therefore there was a great mourning in Israel, in every place where they were, so that the princes and elders mourned, the virgins and young men were made feeble, and the beauty of women was changed. Every bridegroom took up lamentation, and she that sat in the marriage chamber was in heaviness. The land also was moved for the inhabitants thereof, and all the house of Jacob was covered with confusion. This is definitely a stark difference from the text around it. It's not even important to the text. There's no necessity for this to be in there. The storyline would continue without it, but the author places it there. And we see this aspect of all societies being represented here. We have rulers and elders, men and women, bridegrooms and bride. We have these pairs given to us in poetic fashion to show us what? What is the text telling us by doing that? That this traumatic event was something that affected all classes of Israel's society. This event was something that affected more than just the author, more than just Metathesis, more than just Judas. It affected relationships around them. It affected everyone that came in contact with them. And we see that within our own struggle, right? We see that in hindsight in our own struggles. Because in the midst of our struggle, it's hard to see past our own issues, our own trauma, our own events that have affected our lives. But they affect everyone around us. Just like here, the issue, the struggle of Israel affected the highest people, these rulers and elders, and it affected the bride and the bridegroom. It affected these marriages. It'll cause strain on the most intimate relationships. Trauma can tear people apart. I have my own personal struggle, my own traumatic event that happened to me. And I'm 18 years in the military. I've been in combat in Afghanistan years ago. None of that has anything to do with it. At the age of 28, I was at the peak of my fitness. And I'll tell you, the day before this event happened, I deadlifted 635 pounds. I was so proud of myself, full of pride. I was into powerlifting, and I was on a trip for the military. And I don't really go out, I don't party, I don't do any of that. But towards the end of this school that I was at, the day after this tremendous feat of me deadlifting all this weight, I decided to go out with some friends from the class and have a couple drinks, and because we were all going to leave the next day. By the end of the night, me and one other had been drugged, stripped naked, sexually assaulted, left for dead, pictures taken of. At the age of 28, when I'm the strongest I've ever been physically, I was incapacitated. I was brought to the most humiliating place. I was brought to a place where I had no control. And if you're familiar with anything having to do with drugs and date rape drugs, if you have K2 in your system, you have this out-of-body experience where you see what's going on and you can do nothing to prevent it. I didn't tell anybody for a long time. I didn't tell my wife. I finally, through prayer and consideration, leaning on the Word of God, I finally resorted to counseling, Christian counseling. And I found some help, but I was still lying to my wife. I was telling her that I had work meetings in this other town where I was going to have these counseling sessions. I don't know why we do that, right? As men, we can be so strong. We can be mighty. We'll go out and go fight each other over the silliest things, come to brawls with each other, but we're scared of our wives, right? We're scared to tell our wives some of the stuff that they truly need to hear and need to be able to help us with. I finally told my wife one night, lying in the bed, I was shaking like a leaf. And it's been great to overcome that. That's my victory. And in that struggle, that time where I was brought to the most humble time of my life, I can relate with a people who had no control, who felt so incapacitated, who saw the enemy come around them and destroy their cities, take their loved ones, rape their women, and they could do nothing about it. As we go to the second lament here, let's read it. For it was a place to lie in wait against the sanctuary, an evil adversary. This is talking about the citadel that the Greeks had set up outside of Jerusalem, or inside Jerusalem. Thus they shed innocent blood on every side of the sanctuary and defiled it, insomuch that the inhabitants of Jerusalem fled because of them. Whereupon the city was made an habitation of strangers, and became strange to those who were born in her. And her own children left her. Her sanctuary was laid waste like a wilderness. Her feasts were turned into mourning, her Sabbaths into reproach, her honor into contempt. As had been her glory, so was her dishonor increased, and her excellency was turned to mourning. We have some interesting things within the language here and with all the laments that really connect them. There's words that are used throughout these laments that are used nowhere else in the text of First Maccabees. And these words are being used, in my opinion, to tie these laments together, to highlight and set apart, to separate these laments from the rest of the text, to say, let's pause in the story for a minute and let's focus on what's important, the plight of the people, right? And here we have this personification language. The citadel is personified. It's lying in wait. It's ready to pounce on the temple. It's ready to pounce on Israel, Jerusalem. It's ready to take it down. But Jerusalem is also personified. Jerusalem is personified as the mother who is losing a child. Just this morning, we had this event up in our hotel room. I wasn't sure I was going to make it down here. We have 2 rooms. We have a large family, and our youngest child needs quiet space. My 1-year-old I call him King Malachi, because he gets his own room while the other 5 of us sleep in the other room. But this morning, there's a door connecting between the 2, right? And we had locked his outside door with a deadbolt. And he goes in between this room this morning, and he shuts the door and locks it. So I can't get in with a key. I can't get in through the middle door. And I know it's going to be all right. I know my son's not going to be banished to room 1707 for the rest of his life. But that panic hits you, right? That panic hits you at the mere idea that your child is separated from you. We go into a grocery store or something like that. I mean, everybody in here who has children, no doubt, for a split second, you don't feel your young child next to you and your heart skips a beat. Right? Imagine people who have, and maybe someone in this room has, maybe you've lost a child. You know, you see these stories of abductions. I can't imagine. Just for that split second of not feeling my child in JCPenney's is enough for me to be on guard and know that pain. I can't imagine someone's child being stripped away from them forever. That's what this text is trying to tell us. That's why there's poetry in the midst of this narrative. That's why God uses this mother-child analogy. He wants us to feel that pain. The next lament is Metathesis' personal lament. He said, "Woe is me! Wherefore was I born to see this misery of my people and of the holy city, and to dwell there, when it was delivered into the hand of the enemy, and the sanctuary into the hand of strangers? Her temple is become as a man without glory. Her glorious vessels are carried away into captivity. Her infants are slain in the streets, her young men with the sword of the enemy. What nation hath not a part in her kingdom and gotten of her spoils? All her ornaments are taken away of a free woman. She has become a bondslave, and behold, our sanctuary, even our beauty and our glory, is laid waste, and the Gentiles have profaned it. To what end, therefore, shall we live any more?" With a lament like that, can we relate a little bit, just a tiny bit, to why there was such an aversion to this Gentiles, this nations, these people? In this text right here, it starts off with a question, ends with a question. And what do those questions mean? To me, when I read those, because it's Metathesis asking a question of himself, and he ends with a question about Israel. But both of them mean, what's the point of life? Why am I here to have seen and gone through this trauma, this destruction? Anybody ever felt like that? In the midst of our trauma, our struggles, we say, why am I even here? Why was I born? David felt it. Psalm 51:5, it's always talked about as this psalm. It's where unto sin I was born, this text. And people say, see, we're born into sin. We're inherently sinful the day we're born. That's not what the text is telling you. I would suggest that Psalm 51 is a hyperbole. And he's basically saying, I would have been better off dead than to have gone through and had to do all these things. I would have been better off dead than to have brought my sin at this moment and been so disgraceful before God. That's what Psalm 51 is saying. That's what this text here, this lament, is saying. And we all, I would suggest, have come to a point where we thought, why? Why am I alive to have to suffer through this? We also see this aspect in the middle of these babies being slain in the streets. And I think Johnny was trying to hint at that earlier, this idea that we can do a lot for ourselves and we'll suffer a lot for ourselves, but don't take away our babies. We have some friends back home. I talked to them this morning and asked permission to tell their story. Because we can have a baby who's taken away, but they lost a child in a way that I think is very unique, and their lament, their trauma, has affected them in such an impactful way. Their name is Cesar and Kyla Gonzalez. They have a child, Max, and she got pregnant last year. My timelines are off, but she got pregnant, I think, last year. And soon after she got pregnant, they started doing, ultrasounds, all these things. And they found out she had, and I won't even try to say what the issue was because I can't remember. But the medical issue that was there was that the insides of the baby were, they were exposed. Her skin would never grow. She would never, I can't say it any better than that, but so they're faced with a decision, right? The doctor said, look, this baby will never live. We can go ahead and take it and save you the trauma. I said last night, I was talking to someone, I said, I'm not a very emotional person, and here I am this morning, God might just be about to wreck my world, but so they had a choice to get rid of this baby, to allow the doctors to take this fetus from her that would never live. But they chose no. They chose to carry this child knowing it would never live. I can't imagine what that decision was about. I can't imagine the things that went through their mind thinking about it. And we followed their story and their experience as it was happening back home, my wife Melissa and I. And I remember thinking, and we had discussions like, I can't imagine the pain or the struggle of having to go 9 months. It's one thing to deal with trauma for a short period of time. It's another thing to deal with it drawn out like that. So they did. They carried this child, and this child was born, Eva, a beautiful child, was born and lived for, I've been talking with him this morning, so lived for a total of 36 minutes. They had 36 minutes with this child that she carried for 9 months. And I asked them about their experience this morning. I'm going to share you his personal words, Cesar's. He's talking about, speaking of Eva, and he says, to tell the end of the story, I'm kind of messing it up here. They end up adopting a girl later, and he talks about even the struggle with that, them thinking about adoption and feeling guilt for wanting another child while this child was still in the womb. And he says, I wanted her. I began to think about a new child, and I was hoping that we would have this new child in our family. But you got to know, we've been so beat up. For 9 months, we've been so beat up, man. It was hard to hope in anything. Our defenses were so strong and up against anything that had anything to do with joy. We didn't want to be hurt again. We were at a place that was something beyond depression. We were in utter isolation. And when I think about that, his experience, I think about these experiences. These are why God gave us these experiences in words, so that we can see and feel and understand their pain, and that we can relate to it. The next, Fourth Lament, back to Jerusalem. Now Jerusalem lay void as a wilderness. There was none of her children that went in or out. The sanctuary was also trodden down, and aliens kept the stronghold. The heathen had their habitation in that place, and joy was taken from Jacob, and the pipe and the harp was ceased. When we study history, we think about the Renaissance, right? This explosion of art and music and theater and all these things. And it happened, why? Because it was this unique time of peace. Here God tells us that music was silent because there was no peace. Here in the Fourth Lament, we have more of these words that tie into setting it apart from the rest of the text. To trample is used only in this lament. Her offspring is only used in this lament and others. The citadel is only referenced 3 times throughout the book, and it's in reference to lament. But when I look at this Fourth Lament, I think of emptiness that can be felt when something's stolen from us. I've never had my house burglarized. I've had my car broken into in New Orleans, actually, and they stole a hard drive full of good, strong Messianic teaching. So hopefully they'll repent and come to God. But there's a aspect of emptiness and pain and total violation that happens when someone comes into your place and takes what's yours, right? And this happened on a grandiose level right here in Jerusalem in a way that I can't even imagine. Someone could come into my house and take everything I have. And that would be an ounce of the emotion that was felt when the entire nation of Israel, Jerusalem and its temple, were sacked. This total place of emptiness. And even though my experience, if I was to experience that, would only be very small in scale, the pain would still be the same. We would still feel the same sense of emptiness within our souls. We would still feel the same emotions. The last lament says, Then cried they with a loud voice toward heaven, saying, What shall we do with these? And whither shall we carry them away? For the sanctuary is trodden down and profaned, and the priests are in heaviness and brought low. And lo, the heathen are assembled together against us to destroy us. What things they imagine against us thou knowest. How shall we be able to stand against them, except thou, O God, our help? It's the last lament. There's a question in this lament, right? It finishes with a question. I would suggest it's going back to the same question at the beginning with Metathesis, and more importantly, with this fifth lament, there is this calling out, this crying out. The people of Israel have finally come together after being motivated through the Maccabees to rise up. They finally come together and they cry out to God in the midst of their chaos. They cry out and ask for help. The first questions were rhetorical. This one is specifically a question to the heavenlies. They're crying out into the heavenly tabernacle. They're crying out to God and appealing for Him to come down from this heavenly tabernacle and act on behalf of His people and His earthly temple. Mourning, the word mourning is mentioned here and in the first lament. Again, another linguistic connection and clue relating that we've gone through a journey with these laments, that we've started with Israel, the individuals and the relationships of the people, and we've now brought all of these laments forward and given them up to God. Because that's the purpose of lament, right? What is What's the lament's intent here in this text? What's the intent of the lament within the Bible? Because we have all these psalms. Ryan brought up precatory psalms yesterday of cracking the skulls of babies. I used to struggle with those. I questioned my faith over those psalms. Precatory psalms are not there as if they're going to go out and literally do these things and be blessed. These precatory psalms are anger and emotion and anguish given up to God so that those things won't necessarily happen, right? These precatory psalms are prayed up to God as in a way of saying, take this from me. This crying out to God says, take away and heal my sorrows. The intent of the laments in the Maccabees, in my opinion, are to ignite emotions within its readers. It wasn't written in the midst of the story. It was written afterwards, right? So it wasn't written to encourage the people that were going through the struggle at that time, but it's written to ignite the hearts of the people of Israel that would follow, me and you. To be emotionally tied to the story so that we will always act on behalf of Israel in like manner. I believe that the intent of the lament is to show us that through God, grief is transformed to courage. This grief they felt, this immense sorrow, was transformed into courage that would overcome the greatest enemies. It's meant to show us that sorrow is transformed into joy. Because remember, all these things that were attributed to Israel in the beginning of this talk, these emotions and life and courage and sadness and joy, all the ups and downs, they're never attributed to God's enemies, to Israel's enemies in this text. And why? I think the bigger picture here is that it's telling you that without God, we can't overcome struggles this way in the same manner. Compared to non-believers, we have a joy that rests in Yeshua in a way that no one else does. It gives us also this idea that overcoming these struggles can be done individually, communally, and through God. And I think they don't have to be in that order, but that's the order we have in these laments. For me in my struggle, it was internalizing this courage that I thought I would never have. Something that was done to not just a person, a human being, done to a man full of pride, was brought low. I had to first find that courage within myself to say, it wasn't my fault. I didn't do that to myself. To excuse the guilt that I thought that I was feeling, some sin of mine, because not only was this at the height of my physical strength, this was at the height at that time of my spiritual strength. I was walking fervently after God daily and haven't stopped since. Why me? I had to wrestle with that question. And then I had to resort to my community, the people around me, my Christian counselor, right? Then reaching out to my wife. And ultimately, I had to reach out to God and say, God, what are you trying to teach me through this? What is it that you're trying to do? And more importantly, give him praise for helping me have the victory and overcoming. In the story of the Maccabees, we see this before and after, right? I love this poetic aspect. I can hardly read my phone now with this one, but 1 Maccabees 2:9, it says, her glorious vessels, we read this a while ago, her glorious vessels have been carried into exile. Her infants have been killed in the streets. Her youths by the sword of the foe. We have this in a lament at the beginning, and then what do we have at the end of the story? We have the answer to that lament. That through God and his victory, old men sit in the streets. They all talk together of good things, and the youths put on splendid military attire. What was the victory for my friends? This is them. This is the Gonzalez family with their new baby that was born a week before their child died. They adopted it from Florida, I believe, and the mother of the child read their letter one time and refused to read another letter from anyone else. She said the love of a mother that would carry a child for 9 months and refuse to give it up, knowing she would only get 36 minutes with it, is the mother that I want for my child. Furthermore, she's now started this I Will Carry You It's a doula service and bereavement service for mothers like her. See, she has taken this struggle, this turmoil, and she's allowed God to use it to propel her and use her in a way that will build up the kingdom, that will help put away the sorrows and the strife of mothers going through the same experience as her. For me personally, my victory is partly here today. This is the first time I've ever told my story publicly. I told it privately one time earlier this year in a group of 200 men. I say privately because it never would have left those walls. And when I told that story, when I told the story of what I'd gone through, because that's a struggle that I think is silent in our society. We men, and you talk about military men especially, at a high rate are at the hands of sexual abuse and assault. But we don't want to talk about it. And the minute I told my story, 2 other men broke down. They had never been able to voice. They had gone through similar things. So there's the victory, and there's the victory that God has overcome these struggles, these sorrows, these things that are no less sorrowful than what we see in the Bible. And we can use these laments, these texts of sorrow and grief and pain to allow God to have victory. This morning, I was going over this message, and again, I said that I wasn't an emotional person, but I heard this song. I have music playing on my headphones while I'm preparing for my message, worship music. And I heard this song playing, I Sing a Hallelujah. And the lyrics, I just broke down in my hotel room this morning. It says, I'm going to sing in the middle of the storm. Louder and louder, you're going to hear my praises roar. Up from the ashes, hope will arise. Death is defeated. The King is alive. Amen. So I asked the Allens if they could sing it, and I'm not a music guy. You know, last night, my mind's going blank. Our guest singer, Becca Shea, said, is anybody here not talented with music? And I was the first to raise my hand. So I naively asked them, hey, can y'all throw this song in today? They're like, yeah, we need a little practice. So I want to finish with this, and I hope we can all stand up and worship God and praise God. And I want to finish with this song. And they can't play it, but we're going to try to play it here. I don't know if the technology will work, but everyone here has some type of traumatic event that they've suffered in their lifetime. And it's no less important, no less sorrowful, no less painful than the things we read in Jeremiah, Lamentations, Maccabees. But those books were given to us to help us overcome, to turn the sorrow, the grief, into victory. If you want to talk to anybody today, I know there's several people here, myself including. If anybody has a struggle that's similar to mine, I obviously have a close-knit attachment to that topic. I'd be glad to step aside and talk to you, pray with you, let you know how God helped me overcome. But don't diminish your pain because it's less than what we see in our history, but allow God to be the victor because he's overcome death, destruction, fear, all of these things.